Canada holds a powerful advantage that the United States cannot easily replace. While trade tensions continue, one critical resource is keeping Canada in a strong position and leaving American farmers facing growing uncertainty. The biggest problem for the United States is something no tariff can fix. Canada supplies approximately 85% of the potash that American farmers use every planting season. Saskatchewan alone produces roughly 36 times more potash than the entire United States. There is no domestic replacement. And as the trade conflict escalated through July 2026, American farm groups watched fertilizer pricing with a level of concern that reflects a simple reality when it comes to potash. The American Farm Belt is dependent on Canada, and no tariff policy changes the geology that made it that way. The dependency is structural and documented. The United States relies on imports for over 90% of its potassium consumption, and more than 80% of those imports come from Canada. Saskatchewan's Athabasca and Elk Point potash deposits contain some of the largest and highest grade reserves in the world, approximately 1.1 billion tons in potassium oxide equivalent. American domestic production accounts for less than 1% of global output. That gap between what American agriculture consumes and what American mines produce cannot be closed on any timeline relevant to a planting season, because developing a new potash mine takes the better part of a decade and requires billions of dollars in capital. The tariff sensitivity of this relationship was demonstrated early in the trade conflict. When the Trump administration imposed its initial 25% tariff on Canadian goods in early 2025, potash was included, and within days, American farm organizations filed formal objections. The administration reduced the potash tariff from 25% to 10% through a separate executive order within roughly a week. That rapid partial reversal is the single most revealing data point in the entire potash dispute. Washington imposed a full tariff, faced immediate agricultural sector blowback from its own farm state political base, and retreated within days. Even at the reduced rate, the cost impact on American farmers was documented and ongoing. The pricing mechanics are specific. Before the tariff threats emerged, potash traded at approximately $450 per ton, according to the Illinois Production Cost Report. Full pass-through of a 25% tariff could have increased prices by more than $100 per ton on Canadian-sourced supply. American farmers consume approximately 5.3 million metric tons of potash annually. At $100 per ton of additional cost, the aggregate annual impact approaches $530 million absorbed by American agricultural producers. Reuters documented in March 2025 that both American and Canadian farmers face soaring fertilizer prices amid the trade war with American growers exposed on the input cost side while simultaneously facing Canadian retaliatory tariffs on the export revenue side. The parliamentary research on potash and the Canada-US trade relationship laid out why the alternatives to Canadian supply do not exist at commercial scale. Russia and Belarus are the next largest global potash producers, accounting for roughly 15% of American imports. But Belarusian potash operates under Western sanctions following the 2020 political crackdown, and Russian commodity exports face banking restrictions and geopolitical complications following the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Neither can serve as a stable, sanctions-compliant replacement for Canadian potash at the 80+% market share Canada holds. There is no alternative supplier capable of filling the gap that a disruption to Canadian potash would create. The crop dependency is what converts a fertilizer cost increase into a food supply concern. Potassium is one of the three primary macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, that commercial crop production requires. Corn, soybeans, wheat, and virtually every major American crop depend on potassium applications calibrated to their yield targets. A farmer cannot skip potassium in a year of elevated prices without accepting lower yields, because nutrient deficiency produces documented and predictable yield declines. Farmers either pay the higher price or accept reduced output, and reduced output on the same planted acreage translates into upward pressure on the food products. Those crops become. Canadian officials have consistently identified potash as a component of Canada's leverage in the trade dispute, precisely because of this American dependency, Ontario Premier Doug Ford named potash alongside electricity and oil when describing Canada's economic tools at the Council of the Federation, stating Canada is their #1 customer in the world and that the United States needs to feel the pain rather than us constantly feeling the pain. That framing reflects the recognition that potash represents one of the categories where Canada holds structural supply dominance that American buyers cannot circumvent. The July 2026 tariff escalation intensified the pressure on this supply relationship. When the Trump administration signed its 50% tariff proclamations on July 20th, 2026, potash was among the categories granted a temporary exemption alongside energy, critical minerals, and fish. That exemption is itself the most direct evidence of American dependency. The administration, which applied 50% rates to wine, dairy, cement, furniture, and hockey equipment, specifically carved potash out because taxing it would raise fertilizer costs for the American farm sector at a level Washington was not willing to impose on its own agricultural base. The exemption is a documented acknowledgement that potash is a category where the United States cannot afford the tariff it applied elsewhere. The commercial pricing environment for potash in mid-2026 reflected the accumulated uncertainty of 18 months of trade conflict. BHP's Jansen mine in Saskatchewan, a multi-billion-dollar project expected to add approximately 4.35 million tons of annual production capacity, continued advancing, expanding Canada's already dominant global position. The potash import price index had risen from 164.5 to 186.5 over the course of the dispute, reflecting the tariff uncertainty premium embedded in the market, even where exemptions applied. American farmers making potash purchasing decisions for the coming planting season were doing so against a backdrop where the exemption could change with the next executive order. Global News documented how the fertilizer cost dimension of the trade war connected directly to American food prices and farm profitability. Higher potash costs reduce farm margins, increase the production costs of the crops that feed both American consumers and export markets, and eventually flow through to grocery prices. The supply chain connecting Saskatchewan potash mines to Midwest corn and soybean fields has operated efficiently for decades, built around rail infrastructure, blending facilities, storage terminals, and application equipment, all calibrated to Canadian supply. Disrupting that chain would require rebuilding physical logistics infrastructure, not simply finding an alternative supplier. The planting calendar is what makes this acute. Potash for spring corn and soybean planting in the American Midwest is typically purchased and delivered in the preceding fall or the early spring weeks before planting windows open. A farmer making purchasing decisions under tariff uncertainty pays a risk premium even before any tariff is finalized, because supply contracts signed under uncertainty carry hedging costs. The July 2026 escalation, arriving in the middle of the agricultural planning cycle, added exactly that uncertainty premium to purchasing decisions across the Farm Belt. Canada's potash dominance is not a temporary market condition. It is geological, capital-intensive, and expanding. Saskatchewan holds the world's largest reserves. BHP's Jansen mine is adding capacity. Canadian producers are deepening export relationships with Brazil, India, China, and Southeast Asia markets that provide alternatives to the American buyer if the trade relationship deteriorates. American farmers depend on a supply source that is simultaneously growing its production, diversifying its customer base, and facing tariff measures that have so far produced no new American domestic mining capacity to reduce that dependency.